And welcome back to the Thought Vessel. Last time we were talking about why Commander deck templates suck. This time we're going to be talking about a bit more of the art rather than the science of deck building. I'm Levi.
I'm Jacoby.
And I'm Joe.
And this is the Thought Vessel. Welcome to the show. We're back again with our part 2 of our series. Bulwark MTG is still joining us today. Augie and DT in the studio. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
For everyone on the show today, I asked them to come up with one question that you should be asking yourself when building a deck. We have the Commander deck building templates to kind of understand a little bit of the quantitative, but we're now focused a bit more on the qualitative side of things. Each person here has a question, and we're just going to go through each question they picked, talk about each of them. I'll go ahead and start us off. My question is, how much do I need to stop others to do my thing? Pretty straightforward. Certain decks are a lot more proactive and other decks are reactive. As an Azorius player, I know the value of finding ways to stop tempo on people to get the game plan in motion. As much as I love the color Azorius, it is a very slow and patient color. We're not really popping off before turn 5 unless it's kind of a combo deck. I'm probably going to have to run more removal or interaction just to stick around long enough to do something.
Aggro players be aggroing real hard, and sometimes you need to slow that aggro down to play the game.
Not everyone's going to operate at the same speed, and sometimes it matters to deter it or not.
A good example of this for me is between two different decks. My Shrines deck only has about 7 or 8 pieces of interaction. Very, very low for me and the standards of decks that I usually want to do. But the main reason for this is no matter what gets blown up or what gets put on the board, the deck just kind of keeps rolling. I can usually gain more life than someone can take from me in a turn. If something gets destroyed, I can put it back into play or I can just simply replace it. We want to focus more on just getting things in play to keep the engine rolling because it's eventually going to just roll down the tracks and takes everybody out if everything goes well. I don't need to stop a lot of stuff with that deck. But my Simic deck, the Anachronism, where I've got probably close to 20 pieces of removal, that's a deck that I'm wanting to stop people. I have a higher mana curve. I need to let the game go long enough to actually get to that point. Then my bigger mana values tend to start overwhelming the board. It really just depends on the narrative of the deck that you're trying to reach and then going from there.
Sometimes it just comes down to the idea of having the answer versus I'm going to make you have the answer. A lot of dinosaur decks fall under this umbrella that just go, no. Removal is for suckers. Either stop me or die.
As I say every time, the Brian Kibler method.
Shouting Kibler's praises.
You and me both.
One of my favorite quotes ever comes from Kibler. It's best of one is barely played magic. I love that thought. My point to your question, Levi, this is kind of a contentious statement. I know a lot of people push back on me for this, but the quality of the interaction. Inherently, if you have higher quality removal, such as a counter spell, objectively, some of the highest quality removal, maybe not even removal, just interaction that you can have, it's the only true one-to-one that you can have for a card. What I mean by that is, say you're running up against a dinosaur deck. The entire purpose of the deck is Dino comes in, Dino does something, enter the battlefield, something else. If you remove the Dino after it's entered, you're still at a lesser quality of removal because part of the thing has already happened. Whether that be interaction of the Dino entry and things like that. The only way you can assure that your deck needs the minimum amount of removal is if you have a good game sense and you can say, I counterspell this important thing before it comes in. That's kind of my take on it.
100%. Because in the Dino specific answer, counterspelling a Polyraptor before it has the chance to do the thing is better than waiting for it to exist and then you try to do something.
The second question is Augie's question.
The question is simple as how deep is the card pool? And what I mean by that is how many cards do you have in your deck that do the thing? If you have a lower amount of that, how much card draw or tutors do you need in order to get to an effective point? Is this something that you guys regularly think of when deck building?
Definitely can be. I tend to like commanders that have a very vague archetype because I find these are the commanders that I keep around longer. The Sixth Doctor, only thing it says is, would it be better if there was 2 of them? If the answer is yes, it's a viable card for the deck. I like those kind of decks because it's something that I can constantly tweak and interact with versus something that's a bit more niche. I may only get a chance to upgrade it once every couple of years if something comes out. I get bored with those a lot faster. Something like Seeker Commander is an interesting factor as well, because you have to find the one card in your deck, or you can Prismatic Bridge it out if you want to. But if you want to play other creatures and stuff like that, it might make more sense to run a lot of tutors. There's a balancing act to have between getting it out consistently, but then also having 12 tutors in your deck to find something that you already have.
Specifically, Levi already hit on one of the things I was about to talk about, which is Prismatic Bridge. I love building one creature Prismatic Bridge decks because it just is a polymorph for that particular creature you want to play around. My favorite one that I've ever done was Brash Taunter, the nice little goblin that when he's dealt damage, he deals that much damage to an opponent. Very fun deck. That's when I'm not really thinking about getting those tutors because the Prismatic Bridge will typically get him out. That's where we go into, well, I don't necessarily think about that question because the question has already been answered in my mind as I am just keep putting in a lot of synergy pieces to do the thing. A lot of the tutors and card draw comes in when I'm going into, say, my bracket 1 builds. I'm trying to tell a very specific story, and that specific story necessitates tutors to get those particular pieces, such as the Sephiroth deck that Levi very affectionately gave to Joey to talk about bracket 1, wants to kill Aerith over and over again.
Sometimes, especially with sub-themes or really specific archetypes, you can end up in a spot where you might only be able to find 4 cards of a type, or maybe you're running 4 finishers in a deck. When you actually look at the statistics of how likely you are to pull one of those 4 cards by the time you need it, it's remarkably low when you only have 4 copies. Levi was saying in an earlier episode, he likes to include 20 sources of card draw. That's one way around that. If you're constantly churning your deck, whether it's through scrying or just drawing a ton of cards, you're able to get to those cards and include more sub-themes or actually hit your finishers when you need them. But the other way, of course, is tutors, adding 4 or 5 tutors that can grab those cards.
And sometimes your commander quality can substitute for pool depth. For instance, Sisay, whether like Captain, you can lower your card depth in your pool because the commander does a lot of the middle ground for you. Or something like King Kenrith, they have natural abilities, repeatable effects that subsidize a lot of that need. Versus something like a Zur deck that finds it through your deck via combat. It can vary if you don't have those things immediately accessible in the zone.
Speaking to Sisay, and kind of back on the idea of shrines, before we got Goshen Tai and we only had about 10 shrines, there were people that wanted to build a shrines deck. A lot of the logical solution is if I'm already in 5 colors and all of these are legendary, we would just be using Sisay to just drop out whatever we needed. When there's only 10 of them in the deck, you need to get multiples into play in order for those effects to kind of cascade and build upon themselves. That was definitely a good solution for that, where you didn't have to run a lot of tutors. It's mostly just getting your commander out and slamming as many 5-color combinations as possible.
You can afford to have less depth when your commander can let you subsidize it. Sometimes it's just a matter of quality.
We'll move on to the third one. I believe this is yours, Jacoby.
The question I ask is, does my archetype support my style? This is more pointing at things that are outside of the normal things you see in a color combination. Instead of the old Zur, I'll refer to the new Zur in Esper. They animate your enchantments and it feels much more punchy than a normal Esper deck would. Asking the question, does that support exist?
This is a really interesting one. As the game progresses and as Wizards designs more cards, the color theory or the color philosophies are going to get a little bit muddied. We've already started seeing that. Reality Fracture is going to exacerbate that. From a base concept or percentage, you should always try and stick with the color philosophies. It's going to make deck building so much easier. It's why wedges are easier to play than shards, I find, typically, because it feels cohesive. It just scratches that itch, that lizard part of your brain that says, this works. That being said, sometimes you want that recipe that just is weird. Sometimes you want the sub-theme or sub-play that's just so out of depth. Both should be respected, but the majority of the time, stick with what the colors want to do.
From a design perspective, we've seen consequences of people trying to break out of typical norms. The most common example of this is with Kalmen, disciple of Iroas. This was the Boros Experience Counter Commander. Double Strike and Vigilance. Whenever you cast a creature spell with a converted mana cost 5 or greater, you get an experience counter, +1/+1 for each experience counter you have. It was a big, stompy creature deck, but it was in Boros. This was pre-Smothering Tide. This was pre-Jeska's Will. We didn't really have the resources to make that actually work. A lot of just top decking, and there wasn't a lot of card advantage in those colors at the time. The deck felt bad, and it is by far one of the least popular experience counter commanders we have to date because of how awkward it is to play that commander.
I am definitely one of the people that likes to experiment outside of the different color pie. The last one that was actually more inventive and was basically given because of the last Strixhaven was a Boros Mill deck idea. I tried to do that with Osgear and all of the possibilities that I could do with the usual mill artifacts that exist. Osgear can technically make 2. And since you are at least in white, you can also populate the tokens that you make off of Osgear to keep propagating that more and more and more. But that kind of also goes back towards that previous question of the card pool being deep. Notably, the card pool is very shallow in Boros for trying to do mill. Interestingly enough, there is a red card that does mill cards that is still pushing against the grain. It's turning the question on the head of, does my archetype support my style? Because for me, that was the point, is it doesn't. And that's why it was interesting trying to go and try and build it.
When I'm looking at building a deck, I like to stay within. If I'm doing a landfall deck, I want to do it in Gruul. And it's not because I don't want to make a unique deck, because I do. But sometimes I feel like when you're doing your Scryfall search and you're trying to do something weird, you end up with so few choices that you get really pigeonholed. It's a puzzle and trying to figure out how to make it work. But I don't like the game telling me, hey, you have to play this card. If I'm going to put my spin on a landfall deck, I like including some budget card from 20 years ago and trying to make that work. That gives me a little bit more flexibility in how I build the deck personally. I've done enough very disappointing Scryfall searches to find that that's what makes me happy.
Players like autonomy, definitely fair. We have our fourth question. DT, I believe this one is yours.
My question I always ask myself is, how much do I care about casting my commander on curve? It's easy to get caught up in the template of, do I check all these boxes? Does my curve make sense? But one of the things I like to do is think about, how does the deck actually play for the first few turns? Does it feel clunky? And one of the biggest sources of clunkiness is cards that have the same mana value as your commander. For example, in my Golbez deck, Golbez is a 2-mana artifact commander. 2 mana rocks can be a little bit clunky if you're trying to get Golbez out quickly and start running your surveil triggers. There are certainly workarounds, but my workaround in this case was to just cut all 2 mana rocks completely out of the deck, and it flows really well in that current state. How do you guys think about those first few turns? What role does goldfishing play there for you?
For me, there's a couple of different decks that have different answers to this. I ran into this problem a little bit with my Ardbert deck. It's a 3-mana commander. I could put in 2, but I really wasn't using that 4th mana on turn 3. I had found through playtesting that I liked being able to play a ramp spell on turn 2, play on my commander, just kind of eat that extra mana that I'm not using. And then the next turn, I can play multiple spells on my curve so I can continue to kind of build my presence. I'm not playing my ramp to curve up to my commander. I'm playing to curve up to what I'm going to do next. Pretty much guaranteed with a 3-mana commander, you're going to get it out by turn 3. It's at a bracket where that's totally fine, and I'm not really trying to push beyond that too much. It ends up being okay. You have some awkward things with curve. I had a deck for a while that I recently took apart because I wanted to use the parts for other things. It was a Birthing Pod deck that only used artifact creatures. A couple of Stranger Things commanders, Lucas and Mike, Hawkins Robotics Club. It's a Sans Black deck. The problem that I was having, I've got a 2-mana commander and I've got a 3-mana commander, but they really don't do anything if I play them on turns 2 and turn 3 because I need artifacts in play and I need to do a bunch of other things. What I had discovered was if I play them as though it's a 5-mana commander and just play them at the same time, then I can start getting my engine going. The rest of my game ends up playing a lot better because I'm just letting them sit in the command zone for a while and not trying to get them on curve. In that instance, playing them on curve is not important to me at all because I want to sandbag them.
At least for me, this question also changes at the different levels of brackets. there are some games in bracket 2 where, yeah, having your commander out on curve or even earlier on in the game can be nice, but it's not necessary to the actual game plan because your game plan can still work without the commander. That typically happens at lower brackets. At higher brackets, a lot of the decks do revolve around that commander that you did choose, like Kinnan. You want to try and get Kinnan out as fast as possible. If you could get it turn 1, perfect. Turn 2 with a whole bunch of mana rocks, even better, because then you're able to really ramp hard. Then you have my Evelyn deck, where the whole point of running Evelyn in the command zone is the fact that you're going to be casting it after you've started your combo with World Gorger Dragon. That's how you're going to mill everyone out, the constant flickering of Evelyn. It's definitely a great question to ask yourself, and especially with the commanders and strategy that you're trying to go for.
Sometimes it will have an amount of variance depending on your commander. Some commanders want you to just always have them on curve to do your game plan and then worry about your acceleration. Other times it's easier to have the debacle of, if I'm not ahead with my commander out and I only do my commander, why would I not want to ramp first if it's not enough? Krark is one of those key pieces. I always point at him and I go, I always will cast him before my ramp because he effectively is supposed to double my ramp. That is a curve you always accept. In the cases where he gets removed, it is the equivalence of, I have taken some of your removal out of the way and I can still go ahead and ramp then. Turn 2 commander into a turn 3 attempt to ramp is still okay if they remove the commander, because then turn 2 commander, turn 3 ramp, turn 4 commander again. Everything's on curve still. And depending on the kind of ramp I run, sometimes on 3 is still curve. Kadama's Reach is a beautiful 3-drop ramp card. He is more susceptible to the idea of always do the commander first versus something like an Esper. Sometimes you need to get more set up before your commander gets onto the field.
What I'm hearing is that there's 3 different types of commanders. There's ones that are essential to gameplay, meaning your entire deck is built around the commander. There's value pieces. Commanders don't necessarily need to be out on the turn, but it's nice if they are. They give you card draw or they help you do the thing. And then there's game finisher or combo commanders. The entire purpose of them is not to get them out at all until you're ready to win the game on the spot. If that's the case, you're identifying that as you're building the deck. That's entirely kind of what you're building around, correct?
There is something to be said about how dependent you are on the existence of your commander. Levi, for example, in a lot of the games when we talk after the fact, has decks that do not depend on the commander whatsoever. It's a bonus, a feature, not a demand. And he likes to operate decks that can stand alone against any kind of force without depending on something like that. I tend to lean more into commander dependency. When I find a commander interesting, I want to showcase why I think they are interesting.
If we go back to the previous episode with the window theory, sometimes casting your commander as that value piece earlier is going to be more beneficial to you than casting it as a value piece in the later part of the game. The main thing comes to mind of Cody. A lot of why I cast Cody on curve is so that I can have that color correction at the beginning of the game, but is not necessary at the later parts of the game when people have already removed it. Once I've gotten a lot of the color correction, I now have the ability to still cast all of the spells that I have. It's just not to the extra value of, well, I'll get a second card on top of that.
And finally, we have our last question. Joe, I believe this one is yours.
And this one is, how important is synergy for my commander? If you are building around a very specific commander, you're typically going with either ones that are, I like this character and that's why I'm building this deck. This is the mechanic I want to build around, so this is where I really want to be. Or this is, in fact, who I want in the colors that I'm trying to wedge into the slot. That's where I identify this kind, because then the cards that you choose for that strategy, going back to the previous episode, are they in fact going into your deck because they are just generically good, your game changers, or even outside of the game changers that are just common staples? Are they in fact providing the value of that strategy regardless of them just being that good? Or Are there better cards in that strategy that can push you forward?
This is interesting because it's almost counter to how DT and I had started approaching the decks. It's not focused on the synergy. Maybe this is something that we need to go back and reevaluate. We're not focused, or I'm not necessarily focused on the synergy of the commander itself. I'm so heavily focused on two important aspects of the deck, the theme and the sub-theme. And does synergy affect the theme or the sub-theme of the deck? And a good one of that is the theme of the deck that I might have is a politicking deck. The sub-theme of that is flyers or +1/+1 counters. I'll focus heavily on synergy within that. And the commander allows me to waterfall into those themes and sub-themes. I guess at the very top, yes, synergy is important, but I like to get more granular and focus on the specifics of a deck to ensure synergy there.
Definitely fair. I would have also said that synergy going into that main theme is also important.
The best example for this that I could find is your average Winota deck. Every time you attack, look at the top 6 cards. You can put a human creature from among them on the battlefield tapped and attacking per non-human that's attacking. The average deck for Winota is running 46 creatures. That level of density doesn't really allow you to have a lot of instants or sorceries or artifacts. Anything you're doing, you're trying to find humans and non-humans that are going to solve that for you. Synergy is not just important, it's essential. Because if you don't have a high enough density, you're just attacking with Winota and other creatures a bunch, not actually flipping into anything. And then the deck's not doing anything at all. That deck is incredibly reliant on using those synergies to push its game plan forward. There are some commanders like Urza. You can just do whatever you want, play whatever artifacts you want, and it's going to be good. It doesn't rely on theme at all. As long as it's got artifacts in the deck anywhere, it's going to be an effective deck.
I'm a huge proponent for trying to pick cards that fill multiple slots. For example, in running a artifact deck that has black in it, I would rather see a card like Blood Money, which is a board wipe that creates a treasure for each killed creature, than a Damnation. It's partially just because I think it's fun to have something different than you would see in all the other decks. But it also is a card that both fills the slot of board wipe as well as fulfills your game plan. When you have a whole deck that's full of cards like that, it plays really fun. B, you more often have answers in your hand. It gives you a lot more room to creatively deck build than just throwing together a good stuff pile.
This kind of bleeds into my previous question. Sometimes your archetype demands that you do something very synergistic in order to accomplish any of your missions. The example I had led with is dinosaurs are really hard not to just do the synergistic dinosaur things. Because when you're not doing them, you're kind of dead in the water. There are other archetypes that just don't have that immediate support as their only means to do the thing. Depends really heavily on where you're going with your intentions.
A fun backup question for this one as well. Are you guys familiar with Laughing Jasper Flint?
Yes.
The banding, it's not necessarily banding, but the banded mechanic or the outlaws or party or whatever you want to do. Unfortunately, outlaws is just not as supported. Party, while it's more mature, is not as supported. And so you have this weird dichotomy. You have a synergy that's required, but you can't quite get there. I've tried no less than 5 or 6 times to build Laughing Jasper Flint, and it just feels bad every single time. I've used decks from online. I've done my own from the ground up, and I just can't get them to work. Situations where you have a commander, maybe even let's say like Minotaur or Typal, it's just lean and you don't have as much synergy as you like. What do you fall back on if you can't fall back on synergy?
This is one of those questions, and I point at Two-Headed Giant very specifically, where I have the very same struggle. Because sometimes, depending on what you're looking for, the sad answer is waiting for them to print more stuff. To give an example to it, Battle Bond. They printed teams. Your team gets X. Your team does Y. We have so little of that right now that the idea of having that be a deck idea is really bad. Your options are 4 commanders, and they're a pair of partners each. You can't really expand on something like that until the support sometimes just exists. I'm waiting for us to go to Battle Bond again because I want more cards that do team stuff. It's a format that doesn't get enough love in that realm. No matter what I want to do, the only answer I currently see is waiting for them to print more, which just sucks.
Specifically because I have built a party deck before, sometimes you can find that the synergies are a lot weirder. I've found that, at least with something like Party, getting a lot more density of the creature types helps a lot. But outside of that, you're still relying on the basic support cards, whether that be tutors, whether that be increasing generically good card draw that is repeatable to get to that nice synergy level for that commander. That's where that is. I will say, if you put 10 of each for the party, it still works. The Outlaws, I believe they understood the issue with Party and made Outlaws a lot more generic and easier to focus on one kindred type instead of, here, you need 4 very specific types. Even then, it goes into one of my favorite creature types, shapeshifters and changelings. The changelings certainly help shore up when you need more kindred synergies than are normal.
This is a mechanic that I really wish we had more of, and I'm hoping at some point we get a future set. The backup mechanic. Backup was an ETB, give an ability to a creature with a +1/+1 counter, and it created a lot of really interesting situations and scenarios. But even when you look at the deck itself, the precon that was literally called Call for Backup, there was only like 8 or 9 cards with backup in the entire deck, one of which admittedly being in the command zone. What typically ended up happening is the rest of the deck kind of leaned into +1/+1 counter synergies to kind of offset. A lot of times when you have like an underdeveloped theme, you just have to find a sub-theme that works for that commander and then just build around it. Whether it's finding cards that are outlaws with generic value, building it more of a good stuff. You can do Cast from Exile. You could do Theft, playing a bunch of ramp and just kind of being able to ensure you can cast anything you want. Finding a secondary avenue to work from, something that would help kind of guide things along.
Goes back to our episode on the pivot and when you should do that.
That was all 5 of our questions. Anyone have any closing comments before we go?
Typically, you want to at least ask a whole bunch of questions when you're deck building. These 5 will definitely help point you in the right direction of where you want your deck to be. These aren't the only 5 questions. You can certainly find more later on, but from there, these at least will help you get there.
DT, Augie, hit me with it. What's your favorite commander?
Brina the Demagogue. No questions asked. Not hyper competitive. Man, oh man, does she allow for some incredible politicking at the table. And at the end of the day, Commander is a political game.
Probably Helga Skittish Steer, because who doesn't love Craterhoof with counterspells?
I appreciate these choices.
Final closing notes from me is one of the most important things you can do as a deck builder, regardless of if you consider yourself a deck builder or not. Find a flavor that suits you. Find some pet cards. Find something that makes you happy, that sparks your joy. Because ultimately, your decks are going to play better if you enjoy playing them. And yeah, there's room for experimentation, but the flavor of your decks, what really appeals to you is what matters more than anything. Fill that niche. Turn yourself into a counter player. Turn yourself into, I don't know, what's a weird thing that somebody can become? Do that. You're going to be a better player if you do something you enjoy.
Build hominids.
With all the amazing resources we have, EDA Trek, Moxfield, Architect, it's really easy to get caught in the trap of just building a deck that's as optimized as you possibly can for what you're trying to do. If you're playing in bracket 3 like I am, I think is a trap. Because at the end of the day, unless you're playing CDH, Magic is about having fun. It's important to try and find those weird niche cards, those cards that make you smile when you draw them because you know no one at the table has ever seen them. Find those cards and make sure they're in your deck so that when you're playing, it's not just a generic good stuff pile, but something that you're eagerly waiting to draw every single time, and it makes you smile and your friends smile to play.
Remember, only you can play Zakama Storm Stompa.
Getting 40k with Zakama, I see. Right, Stompa, that Zakama.
Listen, all I'm saying is I built Zakama as a storm deck. It's beautiful.
Oh my god.
If I keep dropping it on the table multiple times and then I cast the gut shot for 50, no one gets to stop me.
This is all the time we have today, so have a fantastic rest of your morning, evening, afternoon, or night whenever you're listening in.
Thank you for having us on. We appreciate you guys. We're excited to listen to these episodes back and sound how uninformed we sound. But genuinely, thank you for having us on.
Cheers.
You can't be worse than us.
Thanks for coming on. Goodbye.
Take care.
I do have a pop quiz for you. Here's this question about deck building, this question about deck building, this question about deck building.
No, Joe, just put the synergies together.